Hi, folks. So while we're waiting to get started, we're hoping to learn a little bit more about who's in the room today. So by raising your hand, if you could, who's a student? Great, okay. And who is in policy work? Great, okay. And who's in direct services? Great. And research? Okay, great. And am I missing any major categories?
Can I? Who does mental health work? Is anyone in mental health? One back there? Just curious.
I saw some of y'all raise your hands twice, man. Y'all, I'll be like, yeah, I'll do all that. Liar. No, I'm just kidding. That's a lot.
Alex, maybe we can get started and then catch him up. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
If you want to. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alex Rice. I'm Vice President for the National Urban League's Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives Division. Thank you again for being here. This is a huge undertaking for us. The Equitable Justice team is just 2 years old, and this is our first homegrown conference, thankfully in partnership with John Jay and Vera. So, with no further ado, this panel is designed, as you know, the summit has four main sort of features for what safe communities are. That is resourced, restored, just, and healthy. This conversation that we're going to have this afternoon is focusing on healthy communities. And as healthy communities that are prioritizing using innovative programs that drive resources to people in crisis and reduce reliance on police departments to respond to all situations. In this case, healthy means intentional, equitable, and recognizing the needs of the community. And so before we get started, I want to take a moment to introduce our moderator and partner in this summit, Daniela Gilbert, serving currently as the Redefining Public Safety Director for the Vera Institute of Justice. Now, prior to joining Vera, Daniela was Director of Justice Initiatives at the New York City Mayor's Office of Community Mental Health, implementing innovative programs and policies to increase access to behavioral health care. Additionally, Daniela served as Deputy Director for the California Partnership for Safe Communities and an advisor to the City of Oakland from 2012 to 2016 as they implemented Oakland Ceasefire, achieving a 50% reduction in homicides and non-fatal injury shootings, which Oakland sustained through 2020. Daniela earned an MPA from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service and a BA in Sociology from Harvard University. And with no further ado, I'll pass the mic to you, Daniela. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. And thank you all for being here. So it's actually very fitting that Alex introduced our panel because one of the through lines that you'll hear across the remarks from all of our speakers is the way in which this work really elevates equity and addresses people's needs based on what their needs are rather than the status quo. So I'd like to first introduce the panel, and then I'll ask them a series of questions, and we'll definitely have time at the end for questions from you all, so please don't be shy when that time comes. So first I'll introduce Freya Richterink, the Executive Director of the NYU Policing Project. At the NYU School of Law, and the Policing Project is dedicated to promoting public safety through transparency, equity, and democratic engagement. She leads the organization's Reimagining Public Safety portfolio, an expansive effort to support and learn from jurisdictions that are redesigning their public safety systems to be more responsive to communities, with particular emphasis on alternative and non-police responses. Freya came to the policing project with a background in municipal government and oversight, most recently serving as chief of staff to the first deputy mayor for New York City, where she focused on public safety, criminal justice, and the city's pandemic response. Freya also held roles in the New York City Council and Chicago Inspector General's office. Freya holds a BA from Wesleyan and a JD from Northwestern University and is a member of the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption. Chief Anthony Holloway, who just joined us, is the chief of St. Petersburg, Florida Police Department and began his law enforcement career with the Clearwater, Florida Police Department in 1985. Just gonna pause there. No, I'm just joking. He started when he was 14 years old, in case you didn't hear that. Upon retirement in 2007, he unretired and was selected as the chief of police for the city of Somerville, Massachusetts, and in 2010 returned to Florida at the department he began at as the Clearwater chief of police, and in August 2014 was selected to serve as the chief of police for St. Petersburg Police Department. Chief Holloway earned his Bachelor of Arts degree and his master's degree, and his studies focused on executive strategic management through Police Executive Research Forum and the Senior Management Institute for Police. He's also completed programs and certificates at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government and the Naval Postgraduate School. He serves as chair of the Florida Chiefs of Police Association Subcommittee on Accountability and Societal Change and co-chair of the Law Enforcement Committee at the Criminal Justice section of the American Bar Association. He was named in 2020 Outstanding Chief Executive of the Year by the Florida Police Chiefs Association and is married to Andra Todd Dreyfus of Clearwater, who's an attorney. Moki, who's right next to me, is the Executive Director of Atlanta Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative, also known as Atlanta PAD. Moki Macias has served as the director since its launch in 2017. PAD reduces arrest and incarceration for activities related to mental health, substance use, and extreme poverty through two strategies: immediate alternative to arrest for individuals detained by police, and community first response to referrals through the City of Atlanta's 311 line. Moki received her master's degree in city and regional planning from the Georgia Institute of Technology and has spent the last 20 years engaged in community organizing, program design, advocacy related to criminal justice reform, and community development. Shannon, to her left, is the Director of Justice Policy and Initiatives at NAMI's national office, where she provides strategic guidance and leadership on the organization's work at the intersection of mental illness and the criminal justice system. NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization representing people with mental health conditions and their families, and there are over 650 affiliate organizations in the NAMI Alliance advocating for and serving communities in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. Prior to joining NAMI, Ms. Shannon has worked on a variety of issues to address the impact of the criminal, legal, and carceral systems in disproportionately impacted communities. Originally from Minnesota, Shannon lives in the greater DC area with her husband and toddler and holds degrees from the College of St. Benedict and American University. Last but not least, Ernie Stevens is the Deputy Division Director in Behavioral Health at the Council of State Governments and oversees the portfolio of work focused on improving outcomes for people experiencing behavioral health conditions and homelessness who encounter law enforcement. Ernie supports communities in adopting, implementing, and evaluating new practices, many of which you'll hear about today. And prior, Ernie spent more than 28 years in law enforcement helping develop new programs and policies for the San Antonio Police Department, and also worked as a program manager for the Southwest Texas Regional Advisory Council, which oversees emergency operations for 22 counties in Texas. Ernie was featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops, so you may recognize him from that, and also wrote the Mental Health and De-Escalation Guide for Law Enforcement Professionals. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Wayland Baptist University. Please give us a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you so much. So, Freya, I'd like to start with a question for you that I hope can set the table for our conversation. Communities across the country have taken action over the last few years to transform how they respond to people with unmet behavioral health needs, and some programs are also looking at unarmed response opportunities even beyond behavioral health. What developments in the field stand out to you at this point?
Hi, thank you for the question. So, at the Policing Project, we have a Reimagining Public Safety initiative, as you mentioned, and Through that work, we've been doing research in 5 cities across the country, having really in-depth conversations with community members as well as those in municipal government, everyone from city hall policymakers to police leadership, police officers, alternative responders, and many others. And what's become really clear from these conversations is that as a society, we've asked the police to do too much, and it just isn't working. It isn't working for communities, and it isn't working for the police. And so what we're seeing is all over the country, a lot of really active, innovative work focused on addressing exactly this. You mentioned behavioral health crisis response as one example. And for most, I imagine in here are familiar with that model, but for those who might not be, that often it can take different forms, but often will be a paramedic and a mental health clinician as a team that will go out and respond to someone who would call 911 with a behavioral health crisis or a related issue. So we're seeing models like that come up more and more frequently. But in addition, we're seeing cities identify other types of needs that people are calling into 911 for which there is a better matched response or a different, kind of more responsive way to handle the issue and not involving a police officer. So some of those other types of examples would include everything from car accident responses to landlord-tenant disputes, noise complaints, victim services, welfare checks, just to name some of them. One in particular I want to focus on that's been an interesting development that we've seen is mediation response. About a year ago, the city of Dayton, Ohio launched a mediation responder program, and that consists of trained mediators, a team that goes out and responds to some type of community conflict where there isn't violence or a weapon. They de-escalate, they provide mediation and conflict resolution services on the scene, and then they can refer for follow-up additional mediation if needed. This has been received really well by the community as well as by the police department. And one reason we think it's so promising is that it really kind of gets at the heart of the matter of things that may be kind of called into 911 as a barking dog or something like that, but actually seeks to kind of repair and find a way forward with the relationship between two people in the community. So that's one really interesting model that we've seen other cities express interest in replicating, and I expect we'll see more of them develop. And then I'll just conclude by noting that I think one of the things we've also observed is that right now we seem to be at somewhat of a watershed moment in the area of developing these types of alternative responses. Folks may have noticed that a couple of months ago, the LAPD Officers Union came out with a proposal of 28 different types of calls for service, many of the ones that I mentioned earlier, for which they were proposing that the city no longer send police officers to and instead develop alternative responses. Obviously, it's not the type of capacity that the city can stand up overnight, but it is the right conversation to be having, especially now that we're seeing, even unions engaging in that conversation. So it's an area where I expect we'll see a lot more innovation and growth.
Great. Thank you so much for those responses, and I appreciate using the term watershed moment. It's really exciting to see all of the different jurisdictions that are embracing the idea that we can have different kinds of responses that center people's health and well-being. And we wouldn't be having this conversation today without community demands for change nationwide, and PAD has really played a key role in that dialogue in Atlanta and nationally. So Moki, I'm hoping you can explain a little bit about how PAD came together, what you all do in greater depth, and how that work has evolved over the last few years.
Yes, thank you. And good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here with y'all. I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm dealing with a summer cold, so bear with me. But yeah, a little bit more about PAD. So we started in 2014 or so through a community campaign led by a coalition called Solutions Not Punishment. And the impetus for this work was really the recognition that that police were the default first responders, and that they were often, the police department was under a lot of pressure to sort of disappear people that were simply trying to survive, right? And that at the same time that there was intense intense pressure on the police department coming from business associations, community members, et cetera, there's also just a real lack of resources in the community for people who were trying to survive, right? Whether that was folks engaging in survival sex work, whether it was folks asking for money on the street. We're talking very low level types of activities that, you know, I know there's a lot of conversation in every city about these kind of public order concerns. And so the Solutions Not Punishment Coalition really focused in on, well, if at this point the police are the first responders and they do have basically one tool in their tool belt, which is to arrest somebody, then let's start there. So in 2017, we launched a pre-arrest diversion program. So you know, folks may be familiar with law enforcement assisted diversion out of Seattle, now you know, kind of all over the country. But so very similar to that model, right? We were able to really benefit from the lessons out of Seattle to be able to provide an immediate alternative when an officer has already detained somebody. Of course, you know, that was just the very tip of the iceberg, though. One, it relies on police discretion, right, which has been an ongoing challenge just to change the culture of a police department where they are still measured based on number of arrests, et cetera, right? But two, it also kind of cut community members out of the picture who were not comfortable calling the police, right? And we heard it time and time and time again out in community meetings, et cetera, where people said, well, you know, this is great that y'all provide all these direct services and connection to resources and assistance navigating legal barriers, but why do the police have to be involved in the first place? And, you know, I think the amount of, like the space we have covered, the ground we have covered over the last few years in what is now possible is really astounding. And I want to just acknowledge that it comes out of direct organizing and mobilization, right? Like we would not be in this room today if it were not for the Black Lives Matter movement, if it were not for the organizing and the response to police killings in 2020, where there was a real push to say, this has to change, this has to be different. And that opened up a very different space. So, you know, nationally, as well as, of course, in Atlanta with local organizing. So in 2020, we actually did about a 6-month design process with community members to figure out, okay, how can people contact us directly so that we don't actually have to involve police in these kinds of very sort of quality of life types of concerns. Launched in 2021, so now we accept referrals through our 311 line. That's the line that, you know, New York has it. I saw the ads on the subway, but that's the line you call when your trash hasn't been picked up, right? Or for kind of non-emergency city services. So the experiment that we're engaged in Atlanta is to try and attract those types of calls to the 311 line. You know, to really start kind of bifurcating between what is an actual emergency, and to Freya's point, you know, we know that 80% of the calls going into 911 are not actually emergency calls, right, in most cities around the country. But can we sort of bifurcate? Like if you need help with something, if someone's screaming on your porch, they've been there for the last several hours, you don't know what to do, but it's not really a police issue, do you have another resource? So that's kind of the experiment that we're up to in Atlanta, is having 311 get to be that, you know, public number that people can reach out to for our teams to come out for consent-based outreach.
Thank you so much, and appreciate you highlighting the role of having another number, because it also touches on a national change that hoping Shannon can share a little bit more about. So zooming out a little and thinking about the experiences of people when they initially make a call for help is a really important part of responding to crisis calls and giving people the kinds of support that they need and deserve. 988 is a new number for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, which launched last July after years of advocacy from NAMI and allies. Shannon, can you share a little bit about what's significant about 988's launch and what is new about 988 in terms of what it provides for people in crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, Absolutely. And I really, I just want to touch on something that Moki kind of acknowledged, and I really thought about this moving into my comments today, that, you know, yes, 988 has come online, but we benefited hugely from what happened in 2020. I think most people in the mental health space acknowledge that we were really able to ride a wave that really came up really wanting different responses. I will also say that, you know, 988 is new, but 988 is decades of work of communities really experimenting. So if you've ever heard of the Crisis Intervention Team Program, Police Mental Health Collaboration Program, Justice and Mental Health Collaboration efforts, any diversion of people with mental illness from the criminal justice system, this is really, for the first time, an opportunity for the mental health components to come online for all of those efforts and to really start building mental health resources for people who experience crises in their community. And so what 988 basically did was it replaced the 1-800 number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's been online since 2004. That 1-800 number has been in existence. And a number of years ago, there were some conversations among us of just how do we make it easier for people who might be experiencing a crisis to contact someone, to call this number, because when you're in a crisis, are you really remembering a 1-800 number? And the answer is likely no. And so what happened with 988 is yes, it created this 3-digit number, but there were two things that happened in the federal legislation that really made this an opportunity for communities across the country. And so the first thing that it did was that it expanded the purposes of this hotline. So again, previously it really was for suicide, and we had some language written into the federal legislation that said this needed to really address other types of crises. We knew that there, you know, from the NAMI family experience, we knew that there were people in the community that, you know, needed to call someone in a crisis, needed to talk to someone. And the suicide hotline just didn't do that. They didn't address their types of crises. If you were experiencing psychosis, if you were, you know, if you used any kind of substance and you were just really struggling not to use, they didn't know how to really address that. And so we kind of said, you know, if you're going to expand this number, we really want it to address all types of crises. Also really recognizing that your crisis doesn't sit in one area. If you have a substance use disorder, there is likely an underlying mental health condition there. If you are experiencing, you know, suicidal ideation, there could be a variety of reasons why that is happening, and these counselors who are answering the phone really need to be able to prepare to do that. And so we expanded the purposes of kind of this hotline. The other thing that we did is that in the legislation, there is some language that allows states to pass legislation that levies fees on 911 cell phone bills. Or not 911 cell phone bills, on your cell phone bills, similar to how we fund 911 in this country. So if you go to your cell phone bill right now, you look at it, there's going to be a very small fee that you pay. I think in New York, you guys maybe pay 2 fees. You pay a state fee and you pay a city fee. But it is nominal, and it raises millions of dollars, in fact, trillions nationally for 911. And so they wrote language in like this that basically said, look, states, you can pass legislation, you can levy these fees on cell phone bills, and you can kind of create a new resource kind of to address, to kind of pay for 988 and any kind of services stemming from that. And so this really allows states an opportunity for the first time to create a fund that, frankly, we just haven't seen in mental health ever. We have never seen the amount of money being infused into the mental health system as we have right now in our country from last Congress and this one. And so we've seen about 5 states that have passed bills that have a fee intact. For those of you who live in New York State has not passed this bill. We consider them to be a partial bill state, meaning they passed some legislation to kind of address 988 in your state. It does not include a fee in there, as opposed to maybe Washington State, where people are going to be paying 40 cents every month on their cell phone bill, and it is going to generate millions of dollars for that state to pay for mental health services every year. And so it's really just this huge opportunity that I just can't stress enough, but it also just creates an opportunity to build out what communities have been really trying to do in a number of ways for people with mental health conditions, which is kind of these 3 pillars that the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration identifies as kind of the 3 pillars of crisis care, that anyone who experiences a mental health crisis needs someone to talk to, someone to respond, and a safe place to go. And so that functionally becomes 988. And then in the mental health space, we talk about it as mobile crisis teams. And then kind of the safe space to go kind of functionally becomes crisis receiving centers. And so our interpretation of the legislation is that these fees that states can collect really can go to pay for all of these services. A lot of states are doing that. They are also leveraging funding from other places, and we're starting to kind of see this system really be built out kind of in communities across the country. And it's really kind of, I think, stemming, again, I want to say, from kind of a lot of the civil community calls for change in 2020, but then again, also really having this opportunity through federal legislation in 988.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And so you could imagine a universe in which all of this happens and it's very exciting, but it doesn't actually change the role and involvement of police in certain calls. And so what do you think is necessary for 988 to play as great a role as possible in reducing unnecessary police involvement?
Yeah, so and that gets really difficult. So I think everything that you guys are doing in the justice space, I think we have to bring into the mental health space. I sat and I listened to a lot of the comments this morning and talking about kind of rethinking about who we're responding to and what their needs are. And I think the role of law enforcement continues to play out in this space really because there is a misperception that people with mental health conditions are dangerous. And that's just not true. About 4%, maybe less, of kind of any kind of quote unquote violent community incidents result as from someone who has a mental health condition. Overwhelmingly, it's just not happening. And so I think there really is a need to rethink our approach to how we as a community see people with mental illness. Because, I mean, and the perfect example was right here in your guys' city on the train. There was a man walking through the train who was asking for water, he was asking for food, he was in a mental health crisis, and what did someone do? He came up behind him and took that as liberty to kill him. This is a mentality we have across the country about people with mental health conditions, and it's not just in the criminal justice system, it's also in the mental health care system. If those of you who are not familiar, I will just reference again, I was writing down names of all these people that this has happened to. Ervo Atanani is a gentleman out of Virginia. He did receive an intervention. He received a mobile crisis intervention, and an incident happened in which law enforcement decided they needed to get involved. And several days later, they took him into the psychiatric hospital where he was killed, and there are 10 people being charged for his murder right now. There is a lack of valuing of people with mental health conditions, and that all starts with us. As we are looking at people in the streets, as we are wondering what kind of response do they need, that response isn't a law enforcement response. They are not a danger, overwhelmingly not going to be, and it is likely a gut reaction you are having from being uncomfortable with their behavior. And it is on all of us to really change how we think of that so we can change the narrative around people with mental health being dangerous. And I really do think that is the cornerstone to really starting to draw out law enforcement. And we see this time and time again as we're trying to help these systems come online. Is there's a really big concern about, well, these incidents are dangerous. These incidents are dangerous, and I hear it time and time again, but the numbers just don't play out that way. And so I really think it's about a mentality shift for us about how we see mental health and moving past our discomfort and misunderstanding about what mental illness is.
Thank you. Thank you. So Chief Holloway, you've played a leadership role locally in St. Petersburg around this, and the Community Assistance and Life Liaison or CALL program is providing a civilian response for many 911 callers as an alternative to police, and the police department has been a really active partner in this work. CALL is particularly innovative for how it answers a range of call types without requiring police involvement. So could you explain why launching CALL was a priority for you and what CALL's work has looked like on the ground from the perspective of the police department?
Sure. Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and good evening, good afternoon. So every month I would meet with the community leaders, the youth in the community, and just 4 groups. And after the killing of Mr. George Floyd, we said we're doing something wrong. We got to figure out what we're doing wrong. So we call it the hat. So we started talking about here earlier from some of the panelists, what call police officers go on that we shouldn't go on? The first one was domestic violence. With no danger, just 2 people can't get along. Put that hat on the table, because we're a very young police department. You can't ask a 25 or 24-year-old officer to go to someone's house that's been married for 20 years and you're going to solve that problem for them. Ain't going to happen. All you're going to do is make it worse. Then we looked at the next hat, you know, truancy. My child won't go to school. My child won't brush his teeth. Call 911. That's one set default. Again, I have a 25-year-old police officer. What are they going to tell a 16-year-old? Nothing. So he said, put that hat. So we just kept going through the list of all the calls that were defaulted to the police department. And once we got all those hats up on the board, we said, okay, how do we get rid of these hats? Because everybody gave them to law enforcement, and we took them. You know, we said, we'll take it. And we said, you know what, after that, we need to get rid of them. So we said, why don't we hire professionals that know exactly what they're doing? NAMI does a great thing. They teach officers crisis intervention, but that's a 40-hour course, and that's all the officer gets. So let's hire some professionals. So we put what's called an RFP out, request for proposal, and we look for a third party, not the police department, a third party to start handling these calls. We were very fortunate. We've got a partner. Then the next thing everybody says is, how are you going to run that through the police department? We said, we're not going to do that either. That's going to be a separate entity. They're going to handle everything by themselves. The only thing that's going to happen is the 911 call is going to come into the police department. It's going to be triaged by the dispatcher. The dispatcher and the person from call, they're going to get together and say, okay, this is a call for call, or this is a call for law enforcement. So we started this program in 2021. The program is still going strong. So I can tell you they've handled over 8,500 calls. They've gotten 4,000 calls from referrals from officers and another 2,000 from citizens. No one has been hurt. And 90% of the calls, they're responding without law enforcement. And you're going to hear from law enforcement, and I know it's a shock. Give the hat up. You can take care of it. You know, someone else can do it bigger and better than you can. So that was the biggest issue that we had to do, to give that hat to someone else. And it is working, and it's working quite well. I was telling them earlier, you said the unions, the city keeps funding this program, and the union president, who is our president for us and is a vice president for the state of Florida, he already told us if we tried to get rid of this program, they would file a grievance because they want these people to stay. Because they don't want to go on those calls because they can't handle those calls. And I think as you see more in law enforcement, you're going to see that. People are going to see these hats that they're carrying and realize law enforcement can't do that. You need professionals to do that.
Thank you so much. And so, Ernie, you have been one of those officers, right? And so you bring significant frontline experience to this conversation and a lot more context and education than CIT training offers many officers. And so that was really a blessing and benefit to San Antonio. So hoping you can share a little bit more about your experience serving people as part of the San Antonio Police Department, and also what your engagement with community members taught you about some of the systemic challenges that relate to this issue.
All right, yeah, for sure. Thank you again, and thank you for having us. I want to get past this and get to the questions, because I really feed off the energy of the people that come here that want value and benefit from conversation, right? So I'm going to try to feed you something good and make you hungry, and then you're going to feed us back. So that's true. I worked 12 years on a mental health unit, paired with another officer. If you've seen the documentary, my partner, Joe, we responded to mental health crisis calls. But we worked very collaboratively with our local mental health authority. So we had access to a clinician that we could call to come out to the scene. And we use the clinicians all the time. When we first started, we had to humble ourselves because it was like learning a different language. I didn't speak mental health language. I didn't know how to write the reports. Before CIT training, crisis intervention training, I didn't know what a true mental health crisis was, how it presented, and then what my options were. Okay, I was told, you're a police officer now, you have to go solve the world's problems. Okay, yeah, I can do that with the limited knowledge I had. What I realized very quickly, and I love I've got to quote what they said this morning downstairs. Safety is not the absence of crime. Safety is the presence of well-being. That blew me away when I heard that, because it made me reflect, made me self-reflect on my own career. And I realized something. I was part of your problem. If I got sent to your house on a mental health crisis, I did you a disservice, okay? I'm not going to tell you that because I'm proud or ashamed of that. I'm going to tell you that because of where I am at today, okay? I can take a step back now and look at this, and I can tell you honestly, many, many calls that I responded to, I didn't need to respond to. When I saw the clinician do their thing, and it was like watching, it was beautiful. It was like being in a symphony, just watching this happen, and then debriefing afterwards, like, why did you ask about shadows? Why are you asking about how much weight have they lost in the last 30 days? Who's the president? Like, at this point, who cares? Like, it really became a learning curve. So we had to humble ourselves in law enforcement to say, we really don't know what we're doing out here when it came to mental health crises. Okay, we're very limited. We know that we can take somebody involuntarily, and I did it many, many times, and place them in treatment and care, right, for their own safety or the safety of others, because we had the authority to do that. But what I look back now and realize was we were not utilizing the most least restrictive care or treatment, which is a disservice to you, but it is all we knew how to do. That's all we were taught to do, didn't know. So I say that to you to let you know that as we move forward and you're hearing about these types of programs, my job now is I get to oversee these federal grants that agencies get to set up these either co-responder teams or community responder teams where they're pairing a medic, right, with a clinician, which I'm a huge fan of. For my last 2 years on the department, my partner was a medic, and I had a clinician. Having a medic is huge to these crisis calls, because a lot of times, are you dealing with a drug-induced psychosis, or are you dealing with a true mental health crisis? Well, the medic's going to be able to let you know right away the minute they touch that patient, right? You also have an optional use of force if you have a patient become violent. I don't have to pull out a taser or pepper spray, right? I've got a medic that can carry some sedation drugs. That's an option for you that we never had before. So there are things out there that are being talked about and implemented and done at a very fast pace. And this is a good time. This is a good time to be in law enforcement to see these things happening. Now, should you partner with your local mental health authority? Absolutely, because you can be part of the solution. The problem within law enforcement, I can pull the curtain back and tell you the secret is, we loved being siloed. Okay, we loved it. It's our sandbox. You can't come in here and play. But you would hear officers all the time say, why do we got to respond to mental health calls? You know, we're not trained to do that. But the minute you tell them, hey, we're going to take them away, we're going to take the hat, we're going to put them over here. Well, why are you taking them from us? You're going to get a clinician killed. Why would you do that? That's dumb. It's like, right? You can't win. You can't win. So the data is in. The calls can be handled without law enforcement, some of them. Now, some of them you will need law enforcement, but the majority of them, and I think that's what we're hearing, that what we're learning about, is that the majority of these types of calls do not need a police response. They need professionals with resources, and be honest with you, continuity of care on the back end of these calls. It's not just the front door, it's what is the back door, right?
Thank you. And so even with the launch of 988, many people will continue to call 911 to report urgent situations. And curious if, Shannon, if there's anything that 911 can learn from 988 to handle these situations better, and are there ways that they can coordinate that folks ought to know about?
Yeah, so a lot of communities, I think, are really trying to leverage 988 because kind of the core function is listening and talking. You know, we talk to clinicians and they can spend 20 minutes to an hour on the phone with someone just really trying to help them work through it. And that's not really the function of 911. They have kind of this other mission mentality of, you know, we need to dispatch someone. And I find myself a lot of the times kind of saying, you know, not everyone needs an in-person response. Someone just might need to talk to someone over the phone. And so I think we're seeing a lot of 911 and 988 centers really trying to collaborate and work together and making sure that we can transition calls that may come into 911 that are identified as calls that should really be talking to a mental health clinician. How do we transfer them over to 988 and vice versa, and really kind of work together? And so I think, you know, for 911 centers, I think, you know, learning about 988, learning about what's happening around 988 in your community is going to be hugely important, and then figuring out the ways that you know, 911 centers can collaborate with these new services, because I think, you know, a lot of 911 call centers are just not, they're not equipped to do this in the same way. I don't know if there's any like stellar lessons learned yet, because this is all so incredibly new, but you know, we know a lot of communities are really kind of playing around with this, they're exploring with it. And I think that there's just a lot of opportunity here to really look at diverting people away. And there's just going to be more and more work that's going to be done in order to better identify calls and get people to kind of where they want to go.
And so you mentioned that this is really new, and there's also limited research as a result of the newness. And wondering, Freya, in the context of redesigning public safety systems with civilian response options at the forefront, how are you and Policing Project colleagues helping address that research and knowledge gap?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing research, primarily qualitative research in Denver, Tucson, San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Chicago. And what we've been doing with this work is with groups of community stakeholders, as well as those in municipal government, having really in-depth conversations about kind of starting with basic public safety needs, who does or should deliver public safety, and how do you craft the best response for those needs, and to the extent that they're in those places where programs that we're operating, how has that implementation gone thus far? And we started this research to really fill that gap that existed kind of between what cities were trying to do, cities and communities trying to do with alternative responses, but the lack of real guidance that was out there. And from the research, we've also been able to take what we've learned and build it back into guidance that we're putting out for cities as a part of the project. Just to give a couple of examples of how we do that, I'll mention a couple of takeaways. In our conversations with community members, one of the things that we talk about is whose responsibility is it to create and provide public safety? And in contrast to the government officials and staff that we talked with, we really heard loud and clear that public safety is everyone's responsibility, especially those in the community, and that in many ways, public safety is something the community has been providing for itself through different ways of providing resources over time. And what does that look like, though, when it comes to actually developing and designing an alternative response program? That can take different forms. For example, it could mean partnering with trusted organizations in the community that have been doing this work, providing essential resources to people in neighborhoods. It could also mean looking at who does the work of alternative response, who are those first responders, and ensuring that as those jobs are created, that they are created as accessible without unnecessary barriers to entry, that they include career ladders so that people can begin this kind of work and really stay in it for the long term and have it be sustainable. Switching gears briefly to our conversations with those in city government leadership and government staff, that includes police officers, alternative responders, 911 call takers, dispatchers, many, many others. One of the things we focused on there was why? What are the goals of the program? Why did your city develop this alternative response program? And what we heard in those conversations was actually a wide range of answers, often different answers even from people in the same program. So those, could be, their city developed this program in order to more efficiently deliver first response, more efficient use of police or 911. Other answers were more care focused. Our city developed this program to provide better care, better connections to care for people in need. And still others said that the city developed the program to reduce the harms of enforcement, excessive force, officer-involved shootings, and things like that. Now, all of those are really important reasons to develop alternative response, that a city could or should develop an alternative response program to respond to, but they're really different. And when you think about someone who goes to work every day to either work on implementation or actually as a first responder, if that person thinks their job is to provide better care to people, they're going to have a really different approach than someone who goes to work every day thinking that their job is to more effectively utilize 911 resources. So they'll be making different decisions about design and how to respond, and also how to measure success, how to track, and at the end of the day, know what you're working toward and how to know if you succeeded. So those are just some of the things that we're learning and looking to really funnel back into guidance that cities can use as we continue to develop more of these programs and make them stronger and more responsive.
Thank you. And the measure of success component, I think, is really important, because in the initial coverage around the creation of civilian crisis response programs, a lot of what's been highlighted, which is important, is that people have not gotten injured and police have not needed to respond to a majority of the calls. And I'm curious, Chief Holloway, if you could share locally in St. Petersburg how you handled those concerns initially, and what's the approach that the teams take to mitigate that, and also to, if this is the case, which I think it is, to dispel the idea that these calls are a risk for officers.
Sure. So the first thing I do is explain to them that this has been going on for years and years. So the navigators, the non-police officer, they respond to in a car. If they feel uncomfortable, then they just step back and they call 911. When the officers in the community first started talking about it, the first thing is someone's going to get killed, someone's going to get hurt. They give you all those good examples. And you just come back and tell them, how many probation officers go to a house by themselves? How many licensed psychologists meet with people in their office every day by themselves? When you start talking about all those things, then you say, okay, you don't see like psychologists having an officer sit outside their door while they're talking to someone. Probation officers deal with the worst of the worst, so to speak. They don't take an officer with them when they're checking on someone's probation status. So first of all, you got to prove that to them, that it's there not only for the community, but it's there for the person and it's there for the officer, because you want the best outcome possible for the person. You said earlier, police officers have everything in their tool belt, but if you look at every problem like a nail, then you're only going to use that hammer. Put that hammer away and bring somebody else there that can handle that situation. And you're going to get the people from the far right saying it's not going to work. They're going to tell you that. Like I said, we've been doing this for over 2 years. 90% of the calls, no officers responding. No one is getting hurt because people are being able to de-escalate. And I want to give one good example. And like you said, so here are officers that are called. A gentleman was going through a crisis. They're calling for beanbag, they're calling for taser, they're putting the SWAT team on standby. And one of our navigators gets out of the car, starts talking to the guy, and puts him in the car and drives off. Now, we had 15 officers sitting there trying to figure out how to do it one person, and 2 navigators drive up, talk to the guy, and drive off with him, take him to the hospital. Talking about a waste of resources, because those 15 officers, time and hour, just start adding it all up. Whereas you can get the people that know how to deal with a crisis. It's going to be hard, I'm telling you that, because everybody's going to tell you why not. And I like to quote Dr. Nelson on this one. People like to say it's either this or that. How come it can't be this and that? And that's where we lose it. It can be both. You can pay for law enforcement officers to handle law enforcement calls, and you can pay for experts to handle people that are going through mental health care crisis. It's in the budget. They can find it in the budget. And here I am, a police chief, like I said, for almost 16 years. It's hard. But if you really want to do it, you can do it. Stop trying to figure out how not to do it.
Thank you. And so it's exciting to think about the different ways that cities are approaching this and the different kinds of staffing. And one of the things that we were talking about as we were preparing for this panel was the importance of acknowledging that clinicians and certifications are important, but there's also a really important role to play for people whose expertise is lived experience. And so, Ernie, if you could speak a little bit to some of the opportunities you see around the potential for people with lived experience to be part of the civilian crisis response movement.
Sure, thank you. I think they're critical, right? If you look at how you build out your co-response or your community responder programs, how valuable and what benefit will it provide to the community if you don't have somebody attached to it that's been there, done that, right? In Bexar County, they hired a peer specialist. They started to use her for the active 911 call. She would ride out with a deputy and a medic and a clinician, 2 cars showing up, right? A little bit much, but they would get there. They had enough resources. But the peer was instrumental, right? As an officer, if you're in crisis, go into crisis right now. No, don't do that. I know where to take you, right? If you're not willing to get help yourself and you're in immediate danger to yourself, I know where the front door is. But that's all I know. I don't know what's beyond that front door. I don't know what individual therapy, I don't know what group therapy looks like. I don't know what it's like to sit down and get an education on medication. I don't know any of this, right? I don't know what the back door looks like because I'm not there to pick you up. I'm out there handling the next call. But a peer does. A peer knows exactly, especially a peer that's been through substance use recovery, because a lot of these go hand in hand. So as you build out these systems, please, 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 don't discount the benefit and the value that a peer specialist can bring to these teams. Whether you're running a community responder team with no law enforcement or you're building a co-responder team with law enforcement, you've got to get them involved. The only drawback to that is two things. One, they're extremely underpaid, and they're worth their weight in gold, truly are. So anybody here do social work? Thank you. Your ship has come in. You could probably pick up a phone and get a job at any department right now. They're begging for you. So thank you for choosing that career field. But one, they're underpaid. And number two, because they usually have a criminal background, it stops the process in its tracks. And then it's like, well, you can't put them in the car because they need CJIS clearance. So they can't sit next and they can't look at the computer. So now they're just going to be used in a follow-up. Okay. So the peer would go to the hospital, meet the patient there, or meet them at their house the next day, sit with them, talk to them, find out what their needs are, find out where the gaps were, and really provide that critical care and service. So again, I cannot stress it enough. If you're building these teams out, talk to NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, talk to your local mental health authorities. These are the ones that will have access to your peer specialists and be able to help provide and staff out these types of programs.
Thank you. So one more question before we go to you all, and this theme of what's available beyond the initial call response has come up across folks' comments. So Moki, if you could please share a little bit about the role of the importance of advocating for investing in community infrastructure and how that's come up in Atlanta and the ability to focus more on just the initial call and try to provide services that are less punitive overall.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I could, I want to start with something else. Can I? Okay, I'll be brief. But I think to Freya's comment about the why, why we're doing this work, I just want to lift that up as just so critical in that we need to actually change the paradigm that we're operating under, right? And so we're in this watershed moment. There's a lot of attention on ways that we can sort of take these hats off the police department. But I just want to stress that I think it's really critical that we also have to acknowledge that for us to build something different, we have to move away from an enforcement paradigm. It cannot be social workers that are more effectively getting somebody to do whatever they want them to do, right? Like, we cannot have just like softer coercion. And I just think that's really important in the to contextualize this conversation, because, you know, I think some of the challenges that we're seeing across the country, from New York to Georgia to California, is a real obsession with coercion, right? With forcing people into care, right? With being able to, you know, be able to involuntarily involuntarily assess people or involuntarily hospitalize people. And I just want to name that as something that if that is where this goes, we will be doing policing light, and we will not be actually moving towards a system in which we're really operating out of care and connecting people to resources. So I think it's important to know that when talking about the kind of infrastructure that we need, because the reality is that we have used our local jails to hide people who do not have basic resources. And we have criminalized every activity that we can imagine when people try and get their needs met, or they are causing, you know, us to feel uncomfortable in public, right? We have to deal with criminalization of these kinds of activities if we're going to be in a different paradigm. We have to deal with the community resources that people need. We cannot, you know, our teams, we're a pathway, right? We're a pathway to nowhere at this point, when we really look at the level of community infrastructure that we need desperately and don't have. So we're talking about housing, of course, but we're also talking about, you know, what are the community-based resources where people can just go in and get help, where they can walk in and take a shower, where they can walk in and charge their phone, where they can talk to somebody like a mental health urgent clinic, where are peer respite centers, all of those resources that we have managed as a society to not invest in, because instead we have invested in jails and we have hidden people there, you know? So I really appreciate the question, because I think we cannot have a conversation about how we respond to people suffering differently if we do not address the fact that they're suffering because we're not investing in their basic human needs.
Thank you. Yes. Such an important note to wrap up this portion on. Would love to transition to questions that folks listening have. The first hand I saw was yours, yes, and then we'll go to the front right here. And then we'll go to the middle and on that side.
Thank you so much for this amazing panel. Can y'all hear me okay with that?
Okay, great.
I'm loud. Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Yep, gotcha.
Thank you. Good point. Hi, my name is Marissa. I'm with Californians for Safety and Justice and the Alliance for Safety and Justice. Aswad is our vice president who spoke on the panel this morning, and I coined the term back in 2018, safety is more than the absence of crime, it's the presence of well-being, or coined the phrase when I was in a debate with a data guy at a data conference full of probation officers saying, you know, all we have is criminal arrest rates. All we have is arrest rates and recidivism rates as a proxy for safety. Like when you're buying a new house or finding a school, you look at crime rates and arrest rates and recidivism rates. So I said, you know, half of all crime isn't even reported. Over 50% of violent crime is not reported. Undocumented immigrants, intimate partner violence, family violence, LGBTQIA individuals. So you're already missing, right, half of all violent crime. At best, those rates paint an incomplete picture. At worst, that's what you want to do, right, is paint an incomplete picture. So I'm working with counties across California on this specific issue, because it seems to come up the most from police chiefs across California. We have to answer all these homelessness calls, but at the same time they use the excuse, we don't have enough resources to send people to. Like, I could have the money for a mobile crisis team or alternate response, but we just don't have the money to create all the services needed, but we have the money for mental health jail beds. How you know, has there been progress there? Are there lessons learned from other cities? Like, what could I say to these chiefs in California? Sorry, that was so long.
So I'll step in and tell you about one we do. Like I said, we do two programs. We have another program when an officer rides with a nurse and practitioner, and where you can get the money from is the hospitals. Because what we told the hospitals is, if you give us a nurse practitioner, we can reduce your emergency room and your bed space. Because most of the time, like I said earlier, people don't take their medicine and they're just going through a crisis, so to speak. But with that nurse practitioner out on the road with an ulcer, he or she can give them that medicine right then and right there. So that's a reduce of costs up front for them. And trust me, they'll do it because they know that that person they put in the hospital that doesn't have insurance, they're tying up that bed because they're not making money, and they rather put that nurse practitioner out on the street and handle the problem right in front.
I mean, this is like the big question, right? And like one of the things we constantly toss around and have a lot of concerns about any kind of diversion effort, and we have like nightmares about the fact that Congress is going to cut mental health funding. But there just isn't enough mental health resources. I mean, that's accurate. You know, we were talking about, but I think we are in a moment where we need to work collectively across professions, across industry. People are begging for something different. We need 6,500 mental health providers in this country to fill the workforce gap. That is at a minimum you need a 4-year degree. But for a lot of the supports people with mental health conditions need, you don't need someone with a 4-year degree. You definitely don't need someone with a 4-year degree to respond to your crisis. I've spent years telling law enforcement, I don't need you to diagnose someone in the field. I do not want you diagnosing someone in the field. So why are we saying all of a sudden, oh, we need to have a social worker in the field. We need to have a psychiatrist in the field, a psychologist. I don't need you to diagnose someone. I need you to de-escalate that someone. I need you to figure out what it is they need, and then I need you to redirect them. Now, in terms of services on the back end, you know, again, that really has a lot to do with, you know, how we're using our dollars. And the unfortunate thing is that, you know, there's this mentality that, and to Moki's point about, you know, kind of this force mentality that we either need beds or, you know, jail beds or hospital beds. But I think there's kind of that other answer of how do we get to people earlier and how do we get to people more often and really engage them? Because I think one thing we do know from the mental health literature is that when you get to people early, when you engage them early and often, especially around psychosis, really subvert. For those of you who are not familiar with the program, there's a program called First Episode Psychosis, and basically it's a program. I believe they have at least one in every state now, and it's when someone's going through a first experience of psychosis, we, you know, connect with that person. You wrap your arms around them, you get them all the resources they need, and you engage them in what is going on in their life and what their options are. And so I think it's really about looking at these other ways that we can engage people, because hospital beds and jail beds just both are really expensive. They're easy, but they're really expensive. And so I think, you know, it's really, I think, an opportunity, because I think the social work community also wants to do it differently. I think the mental health community wants to do their work differently. People are tired of doing it the status quo, and so I think we have to leverage that moment and the fact that we can't get people to do these jobs. So let's reimagine. I know we're reimagining everything, right? Like, let's reimagine how we do some of these jobs, right? Because nobody wants to do them, and we can't force people to do those jobs.
Can I add just one thing? Thank you for that question. You know, I think one piece is that we really do have to straightforwardly have the conversation about decriminalizing some of these activities, because then we won't need so many jail beds, be they mental health jail beds or, you know, whatever jail bed, right? So I do think that has to be a part of that conversation, and people, it's a very hard time in this country to have that conversation. So I just encourage you to keep having it. The second is, I think we need to be creative about what housing looks like. You know, if we're talking about a hoteling strategy long term, if we are talking about SROs, right? If we're talking about rooming houses. I mean, in Atlanta, we work with the most like mom and pop kind of, raggedy places, because they are the folks who work with our people, and they will work with us when somebody has had a hard time or they're using still or all the things, right? So just to be able to like have some more flexibility, that we don't need these big institutionalized spaces. Like we really could, if we can find places that are, doing the work already with people in their community and give them a little bit more support. Like people often just need a place to have their basic needs met and be able to close the door behind them, and then you wrap support around them while they're there. So I just encourage us to be a little more flexible with thinking about what housing could look like for people.
Who's next?
Hi, my name is Yusuf Wali. I'm the founder and executive director of Timeless Group. We're based in Los Angeles, California, and we found out about this program last minute, and that's part of my question is creating national coalitions that include folks like us. We're a lived experience organization, and me as a founder, I did 22 years in prison, and but we have 134 employees of lived experience folks that's partly housing and part of workforce, like what you're mentioning about de-escalation and things like that. Part of our workforce is they're replacing security guards with our workers that they call ambassadors. So many of the larger organizations in Los Angeles are coming to us for their security needs versus law enforcement, security, and they're hiring our ambassadors, which are people that are formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated folks. So our model has been working, but a lot of times we're not included in these conversations like this. And I'm just wondering what's being done to kind of include some of the smaller organizations like us because we need the data too. We need to know what's going on. We need to know how we can better serve the people in our communities as well. So, thank you.
I would say a quickie, at least from my space, NAMI runs, we have a micro website that's reimaginecrisis.org. It's where we kind of house all of our resources and information related to kind of crisis response and what's going on and kind of building out crisis response resources. We also have a map where we track state legislation related to kind of mental health crisis response. And we have a lot of national partners kind of on that. And we really do try to, I'm making a note of, we really do try to connect our members down to kind of who are the folks happening kind of locally. But that's just one space to kind of learn about, what's going on. But others, if you have.
Yeah, along similar lines, as a part of our Reimagining Public Safety project, we've put together a website, safetyreimagine.org, and through that, we're also bringing people together in communities of practice to talk about their experiences implementing and needs for different types of alternative responses. And one of the things we also try to do in that work is to be really expansive about what we mean by saying an alternative response. And it may not mean always, a different first responder, but it's another way of providing a public safety service. It could be other functions that police perform or others perform, or moving services online, just really different ways of approaching communities' public safety needs. So that's one thing I would also recommend checking out.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, in the middle. Would the person in the middle have a question still? How about, yeah.
Hi. You good?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lucy Trishman. I'm with the ACLU Disability Rights Program. Wanted to thank all of y'all so much for your time today. Have really appreciated all of this conference, but particularly this panel because my work centers around crisis response systems. But I do have to say that I'm a little disappointed that I really didn't hear the word disability used at all. And we're talking about disabled people. We're talking about people with mental health conditions who are also people with disabilities. And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on why there is a dichotomy there, but I'm not hearing us talking about a cohesive, beautiful community, which is what we are. And as a cohesive, beautiful community, we have a set of principles. We have the disability justice movement. which informs all of the work that I personally do and all of the work that I think should be done around policing and mental illness because we are focusing on disabled people. And so leaving out that perspective really does an injustice to the communities that we're trying to serve. So I would encourage y'all to take a look at the disability justice movement. It's a set of 10 principles, and one of those is interdependence. And through interdependence and the disability justice movement, what we try to do is retake control of the systems that have taken control of us. And throughout this panel, I've heard folks mention that we're replacing the police, that we're taking hats off tables. But I don't know, I'm curious, is that what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to eradicate the role of the police and reimagine, as we've been saying, a completely new program, something new that's owned by the people who are actually being impacted by it? You know, with the statistic about only 4% of violent crimes are committed by people with mental illnesses. Over half of Black disabled men will be arrested before they turn 28. And because of all of these factors, what are y'all, through your work, doing to ensure that disabled people have ownership over their own futures? That these programs will be controlling our access to healthcare, our access to life, and our ability to continue to be equal members of the community.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I definitely hear it, and I agree that this is not representative of sort of holding that space. That I think the disability justice movement has really actually pushed the boundaries of what is possible in this kind of work. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. I would just say, you know, I think the commitment to identifying values that sort of need to be fundamental to this kind of work needs to be closely tied to and learning from, in particular, the disability justice movement. I think particularly around consent and around, more than that, like bodily autonomy and what it means to be well, right? That we don't have a standard of like what is normal, quote unquote, what is wellness, but rather that we really trust people's self-determination, people's, you know, what wellness means for every individual person, and that we design accordingly, right? And that really has to be the crux of these kinds of responses for us to move away from the current paradigm that we're in. So I just appreciate you lifting that up.
And I'll say the same, I appreciate that. I have a counselor I meet with, matter of fact, I gotta meet with him on Thursday, Disability Council, and they go through our policies and procedures before we put anything in place to make sure that they're a part of the conversation. And like everybody was saying, we're trying to reimagine, not trying to get rid of police, but how do we reimagine, like I said earlier, how did law enforcement get all these hats? How did it become a default? And let's give it back to the community so the community can help out with their community.
Thank you so much. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. Really appreciate each of the panelists. If we could give you another round of applause. Thanks, everyone.